Hey, welcome. My name is Juan. I hope you're doing well. So today I'm here to do my March wrap-up. So I'm going to talk about the 7 books I read in the month of March of 2022. I read 7 books, which is actually a lot for me. Some of those books were old favorites. Most of them I read for the first time. And there was one disappointment. So the first book I read was The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. And this was the book for the month of March for my 12 books for 2022 reading project. I'm going to link to the project here, to the announcement video, so you can see all the books in case you want to read along with me. It's not too late. I'm also going to link to my full review of The Corrections. I made this video in which I gave my all and I talk about this amazing novel and my reading experience. So that video doesn't have any spoilers. So even if you haven't read The Corrections, watch that video to find out why I recommend it. Really, I'm not going to talk much about The Corrections in this video, but in case you just don't want to read the whole, watch the whole review, let me tell you a little bit about it, okay? So this novel is about a very unhappy family, American family from the Midwest in the late 1990s. It is also a critique of American society. Not everything in the novel works, but I had a great time. I couldn't put it down. I loved that novel. I want to read more by Jonathan Franzen. All the characters, all the members of that family are horrible people, but I ended up loving each and every one of them. So I highly, highly recommend The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. Next, I read The Fortune Man by Nadifa Mohammed. This is a fairly recent novel. You might have heard about it because it was long-listed, I think, for the Booker Prize last year or the year before. That's not why I read it. I read it because I wanted to read something recent. You know, last year I practically only read classics. I want to give literature a chance. I want to discover new authors, not just new to me, but people who are writing their first novel or the first few novels. So a while back, I listened to one of my favorite book podcasts, and it was an interview with Nadifa Mohammed, the author of The Fortune Man, and I kind of liked the sound of it, and I ended up getting this book. I think it was the wrong book to get, but I'll go into that in a minute. My main impulse is that I wanted to read something recent. So The Fortune Man is a fictional account of real events that took place in Wales, so that's in the United Kingdom, in Wales, in the 1950s, when a Somali migrant who was named Mahmoud Matan, I think that's how you pronounce the name, was condemned for a crime he didn't commit. And of course, racism played a big part in his trial and in his conviction. And historically, he's an important historical figure, well, not as himself, but what he represents, because he was the last man to be hanged in Cardiff prison. That's not really a spoiler. I knew that going in. If you read anything about this book, that's the first thing you'll find out about. That didn't bother me. I don't think that spoils the novel. I think what happens in a novel is not important. It's how you tell the story, how the writer tells the story. And, you know, the author knows that you're going to know, that most readers are going to read it because they know about it. Or they're going to read it for other reasons, but they're probably going to know what's going to happen to the main character. So the important thing is how she tells the story. And I did not like the execution, no pun intended. I did not like this novel. It was a huge disappointment. I found it really boring. There wasn't anything in the storytelling that caught my imagination or that I found evocative or moving, and it should have been a moving story. I would say, and I'm not one to exaggerate, but I think reading The Fortune Man was the worst reading experience I have had in a long time. Not because it was terrible, not because I suffered reading it, but because I was bored, and I think that's the biggest crime a book can commit, right? Like, books should be fun, should be interesting to read. I think I made a mistake. I think I probably should have read her book, her debut novel, Black Mamba Boy, which is based on her father's life. I think that's the book that she talked a lot about in that interview that I heard, although she also talked about The Fortune Man, and I probably conflicted both of them in my mind, and I ended up picking up the wrong one. I've heard really good things about Black Mamba Boy. I'm not in a hurry to read it because I didn't have a good time reading The Fortune Man, but if I ever read another book by the same author, it will be that one. I've heard good things about it, particularly from my friend Didi from Brown Girl Reading. Her channel is amazing. Didi is amazing. She's one of my favorite booktubers. People who watch my channel know that. So go subscribe, watch her videos, because she's a lot better than I am reviewing books. She has really good taste and she's so much fun to watch. After reading The Fortune Man, I knew I wanted to have better reading experiences. So I went to some books that I've read before or some authors that I know are always going to provide me with a good reading experience. So I reread a little novel entitled Written on the Body by the English writer Jeanette Winterson. I love Jeanette Winterson's early writing, and I love this one. I had such a great time reading it. Written on the Body is really ambitious in a way that before going back and rereading it, I thought, do I really admire this book or do I like it? I couldn't remember my thoughts about it because Janet Winterson is the kind of author that you could admire because she's so good. But whether you like her books or not, that's something else. But I reread this novel and yes, I admire it greatly, but I also love it. Just in case you know nothing about this novel without spoiling anything, this is a first-person love story where the gender of the narrator / protagonist is never revealed. So you don't know the gender, the sexual identity of the protagonist who is telling you his or her story or their story. There's nothing in the novel. Hard as you could look for clues, I had no clue if this was a man or a woman or what. This time, and when I read it before, I always assumed that the narrator is a woman, but that's probably because the author is Janet Winterson. But that's just on me. I don't know how other readers feel about it. I don't think there's anything in the text to indicate that it's either a man or a woman. Just doing that is such an accomplishment that it's the kind of book that you could admire. Wow, I'm really impressed that Janet Winterson could do this. But actually I had a great time reading it, okay? So it's both for me. It is a deceptively simple novel, but it's also deep, it's philosophical, but not pretentious. So, you know, you can read it at different levels, which is something that only masterpieces, only really great literature is able to do, where you can just enjoy it at one level just for the story, the plot, or whatever, or the character. Or you can enjoy it for that, but also enjoy it for kind of the philosophical ideas because it makes you think about your own life, in this case about your love life. But this novel is about bodies, it's about the body. And what's so fascinating is we don't know the kind of body the narrator has, whether it's a male, a female body, any kind of body. We just don't know that. And the body is so important in this novel. What is the story? I said it's a love story that's not going to tell you much. Let me tell you a little bit more without spoiling anything at all, okay? So the narrator of this novel has a love affair with a married woman named Louise. That's all I'm going to say. The novel chronicles the love affair, all the ups and downs in it. That's all I'm going to say about the plot. One thing about Janet Winterson's early writing is that I find it so original. I really want to read some of her most recent writing. But really, I love going back and reading her earlier novels. You know, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, The Passion, Sexy and the Cherry. I just love those books. I think that nobody writes like her. I think if you like Virginia Woolf, just to mention a classic, you will also like Janet Winterson. But she is a lot more than that, because what she does is something so specific, so different from anything else I've ever read. And something that Written on the Body asks, which I think it's important and I think it's a central question, is does sacrifice equal love? How far will you go for love? Will you sacrifice your own happiness just because you think it's the best thing for the person you love? I'm not going to say how that plays a part in the novel, but please read Written on the Body. It is amazing. And I also had a great time reading Jack by Marilynne Robinson. Marilynne Robinson is one of my favorite writers. She's written this series of novels, which she started with Gilead, then she wrote Home, then Lila, and now Jack. So this is the fourth novel in the series. This time the novel focuses on one of the more or less minor characters in the previous novels, Jack Boughton. Jack Boughton is the black sheep in Reverend John Boughton's family. And of course, we are familiar with him from previous novels, but we finally get to read about his life in Tennessee and his marriage to a black woman in the segregated South. We know all of that from the first book from Gilead, but we don't really know what happens. We weren't there. So this time we get to hear everything. We get to hear from him directly, and it is such a beautiful novel about really, you know, faith and religion, like all the other novels in the series, but also about love and forbidden love and about racism, but from a very unique point of view, unlike anything else I've read before. Those novels, you know, Gilead and all the rest, and of course Jack, are great reading experiences. It's something really comforting to read for me. I would say though that if you're coming to this video and you haven't read Gilead or any of the previous novels, I think it's better. I think you could probably read Jack, but I think it's a lot better if you went back and read Gilead. Why? Not only because this novel and the previous novels refers to the other novels, so Jack refers to things that we found out reading Lila or reading Home or reading Gilead. That's fine. I think it's all very self-explanatory anyway. You don't need to know everything. But, you know, the novel will make a fuller impact if you've read the other ones. But also because I think, you know, this series, as much as I love it, I don't think it's for everyone. So I would recommend reading Gilead. Read Gilead, which is amazing. And if you don't gel with the writing, if you don't enjoy it, if you don't like what she's telling you or the style, don't bother with the rest. You can read Gilead and not have to commit to reading the rest. But if you like Gilead, or if you love Gilead, you're gonna love the 3 later novels, and you're gonna get to Jack and you're gonna be happy that you got there. That's how I feel. Another thing that I wanna say about Jack and about the Gilead series, if you like, is that, you know, something that worried me, because these novels tend to come out in intervals of several years, and I often take even longer to get to them. I'm never in a rush to go to the latest novel in the Gilead quartet as it is now, and yet I don't have to reread them. You know, I read Jack, and reading Jack, just the act of reading the novel reminded me of the stuff from the previous novels. I think that's because of how good the writing is and just how the novels are structured. And I think that's really positive, a really good aspect that I wanted to highlight. I think Jack and Gilead and all the other novels are masterpieces of American literature. And talking about American masterpieces, I reread Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton in March. This is a novel that I read a couple of years ago and really loved it. I probably talked about it in this channel in one of my old videos. Don't go back and watch those, they're terrible. But I think now that I've read it twice, I can say that Ethan Frome is one of my favorite classics. I think it has the perfect plot. It is also the perfect winter novel, so it's perfect to read it in winter. I read it just at the end of winter and it was just great. It is a tragic love story. Tragic is it's incredibly sad. But you know, sometimes, I don't know if it's just me, but I think sometimes it's good to read something really sad. I think reading something that is really sad makes me feel better about myself. I don't know. Anyway, Ethan Frome, the character in the novel, is a New England farmer who is married to a sick wife, Zena. And they live with Zena's cousin, Maddie, who's very young and very beautiful. Basically, she's unhealthy, so she's everything that Zena isn't anymore. So of course, Ethan is secretly in love with Maddie, but perhaps not so secretly, because one day Zena sends Maddie away without any explanation, apparently, so perhaps she knew what was going on. Nothing, by the way, was going on. And I wouldn't spoil the novel anyway. This is just the setup, okay? It is a haunting novel. It's a novel that will stay with you. It stayed with me for years since I read it the first time, and reading it the second time, even though I knew exactly what was going to happen, had the exact same impact. That's why I don't care about spoilers. Spoilers never really spoil novels for me. But anyway, that's just me. So yeah, Ethan Frome is amazing. And another classic that I reread is Emma by Jane Austen. I'll admit that I'm not a fan of Jane Austen. I admire her writing. I think she's one of the most important writers universally. But I don't really enjoy her novels in the way that I'd like to enjoy literature anyway. But I want to read and reread her novels to see if I finally get it. So every so often I read or reread one of her novels to see if I finally get it. And I reread Emma, and I had a wonderful time with it. So I'm really surprised. I don't know if Emma is her best novel or what. I'll have to reread some of the others that I've read and even read a couple that I haven't read yet. But Emma is so funny. You know, I feel like everybody knows the plot of Emma at this point, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. So Emma Woodhouse, the main character, is a young girl, you know, and she thinks that she's a great matchmaker. Of course, she's not a great matchmaker, and her matchmaking only causes a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstandings. Some of the situations in the novel that derive from those misunderstandings are actually funny. They're funny now in 2022. So, you know, the novel is fresh. I'll give Austen that. The only character who can see through Emma is her sister's brother-in-law, Mr. Knightley, and that's all I'll say about the plot. Emma is a comforting book. It has a happy ending, so if you feel like reading something that is funny and has a happy ending, but it's also good, you know, like you're not going to waste your time, I think Emma, it's a really good suggestion. And I read In Search of Lost Time, Volume 3, which is the Guermantes Way. I think, you know, now that I'm about to start Volume 4, I would say that it is worth persevering with Proust. That's all I say. I think Proust is an important writer. You don't need me to say that. And I've decided something, instead of talking about this volume, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to talk about the volumes individually anymore, as I did with volumes 1 and 2, because I think it's better to read the whole thing and then talk about the whole thing. So I will make a video once I've read all 7 volumes, and I will tell you what I think about In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. But please let me know if you've read any of these books or what you read in March. I'm really curious about it, and I hope to see you again very soon on another video. Take care. Bye.